The smoke still hung in the air 3 days after the fire, a bitter reminder that someone wanted Tessa Crawford off her land badly enough to torch everything she had built. She stood among the blackened timbers of what had been her barn, her hands blistered and raw from pulling out charred wood, with nothing but her own determination and a pair of worn work gloves. The main house was worse, just a skeleton of support beams reaching toward the Nevada sky like the ribs of some great fallen beast. Every wall, every fence post, every structure on her 200 acres had been reduced to ash and memory in a single night while she had been in town buying supplies. The marshal had come and gone, offering little more than sympathetic looks and vague promises about investigating. Tessa knew the truth. The Garrett Mining Company had made their intentions clear for months now. They wanted her land for the silver deposits they claimed ran beneath it, and they would not stop at arson. But she would be damned if she would give them the satisfaction of watching her crumble. She was 23 years old and had worked this ranch alongside her father since she was tall enough to reach a horse's stirrup. When he died 2 winters past, everyone in Carlin, Nevada expected her to sell and move back east where proper young ladies belonged. Instead, she had filed the deed in her own name and worked sunrise to sunset, proving she could manage the place alone. Now all that work sat in piles of ash around her boots. Tessa wiped the soot from her forehead and began dragging another burned beam toward the pile she was making for salvage. The November air was cold enough that her breath came out in visible puffs, but the physical labor kept her warm. She had already been out here since first light, and the sun was climbing toward noon. That was when she heard the horse approaching. Tessa straightened, one hand instinctively moving to the rifle she kept propped against an intact fence post nearby. Living alone on a ranch made a woman cautious, and living alone on a ranch someone had just burned down made her downright suspicious. The rider came into view, a tall figure on a chestnut mare that moved with the easy gait of a well-trained animal. As he drew closer, Tessa recognized him as one of the cowboys who worked the cattle drives through this territory. She had seen him in town a handful of times over the past year, always polite, always keeping to himself. Yates Sullivan, if she remembered right. He was maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled at his collar and the kind of weathered face that came from years of outdoor work. He reined in his horse a respectful distance away and touched the brim of his hat. "Miss Crawford, heard about what happened. Came to see if you needed any help rebuilding." Tessa crossed her arms over her chest, suddenly aware of how she must look, covered in soot and ash, her long auburn hair escaping from its braid in wild tendrils. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Sullivan, but I can manage." Yates dismounted with the fluid grace of someone who had spent more time in a saddle than on his own 2 feet. His gray eyes took in the destruction surrounding them, and something flickered across his face that might have been anger or might have been admiration. "Madam, I do not mean any disrespect, but this is more than a one-person job. I have got some time before the next drive, and I am good with my hands. I said I can manage." Tessa kept her voice firm, though not unkind. She had learned the hard way that accepting help often came with strings attached. Men helped women for one of 2 reasons in her experience. They wanted something from them, or they wanted to prove the women could not handle things alone in the first place. Either way, she refused to play that game. Yates studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, Miss Crawford, but if you change your mind, I am staying at the boarding house in town for the next few weeks. Mrs. Henderson knows how to reach me." He mounted his horse again, but before he rode off, he looked back at her. "For what it is worth, what you are doing here takes real courage. I hope you know that." Then he was gone, leaving Tessa alone with the ruins and an unexpected warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the physical labor. She shook her head and got back to work. She did not have time for foolish thoughts about gray-eyed cowboys. The sun would set in about 6 hours, and she wanted to have the barn foundation cleared before dark. By the time the light started to fade, Tessa had made significant progress. Her arms ached with a deep, bone-tired pain that she knew would be worse tomorrow. But she had cleared nearly half the barn foundation and sorted the salvageable wood from the complete losses. She had also sketched out plans for rebuilding in the small notebook she kept in her coat pocket, calculating materials and costs with the grim realization that she would need to spend every penny of her savings, and then some. The temporary shelter she had set up in the one outbuilding that had survived the fire was not much, just a tack room with a cot and her essential supplies, but it kept the wind off. Tessa heated beans over a small fire and ate them straight from the pan, too tired to bother with niceties. Her hands shook slightly as she lifted the spoon to her mouth, a combination of exhaustion and the adrenaline that had been keeping her going finally wearing off. She thought about Yates Sullivan's offer as she chewed the tasteless beans. Part of her wanted to accept, wanted to have someone share this impossible burden. But accepting help felt too much like admitting defeat, like acknowledging she could not do this alone. And if she could not do this alone, then everyone who said a woman had no business running a ranch would be proven right. Tessa finished her meal and lay down on the cot fully clothed, pulling a wool blanket over herself. Through the gaps in the tack room walls, she could see stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, the men who had burned her ranch were probably laughing, certain they had broken her spirit. She fell asleep with her jaw clenched in determination, already planning tomorrow's work. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of relentless labor. Tessa rose before dawn each day and worked until her hands were too numb to grip a hammer. She hauled lumber from town in a borrowed wagon, paying the livery owner to let her use it in exchange for future work. She dug post holes until her shoulders screamed in protest. She raised walls frame by frame, using techniques her father had taught her, and a few she figured out through trial and error. Yates Sullivan rode out to her ranch 3 more times during those weeks. Each time he offered to help. Each time, Tessa politely but firmly declined. And each time, something in his expression made her chest feel tight in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. The 3rd time he visited, he brought supplies. "Before you say anything," he said, holding up a hand as Tessa opened her mouth to protest. "These are not charity, Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house was cleaning out her late husband's workshop and asked if I knew anyone who could use some tools and spare nails. I thought of you." Tessa looked at the box of supplies in his wagon. There were hammers, saws, a good level, and several pounds of nails. Her own tools had been destroyed in the fire, and she had been making do with borrowed and makeshift equipment. These would make the work significantly easier. "How much does she want for them?" Tessa asked, already calculating how much she could afford to spend. "Nothing. She said they were just taking up space and she would rather see them put to good use." Yates lifted the box down from the wagon. "Where do you want me to put this?" Tessa hesitated, torn between pride and practicality. Finally, she pointed toward the tack room. "In there, and tell Mrs. Henderson I am grateful." Yates carried the box where she indicated, then paused on his way back to his horse. "You have made impressive progress," he said, gesturing to the barn foundation, which now had the beginning of a frame structure rising from it. "How long have you been working on this?" "Every day since the fire." Tessa wiped her hands on her work pants, leaving streaks of sawdust and dirt. I should have the barn mostly finished in another week or two, then I can start on the house. You are rebuilding the house too? Yates's eyebrows rose. Miss Crawford, that is months of work for a full crew. Doing it alone will take you well into next year. Then it takes me into next year. Tessa met his eyes steadily. I am not leaving my land, Mr. Sullivan, no matter how long it takes to rebuild. Something shifted in Yates's expression, a look of respect mixed with something else she could not quite identify. No, madam, I do not suppose you are. He mounted his horse, then looked down at her. May I ask you something? Tessa nodded. Why would not you let anyone help you? Half the town knows what happened here. There are good people in Carlin who would be willing to lend a hand if you just asked. Tessa was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. Finally, she said, because if I accept help, then when I succeed, people will say it was only because others did the work for me. They will say I could not manage on my own, and every man who thinks women are too weak or too foolish to run a ranch will point to me as proof. She lifted her chin. I need to do this myself, Mr. Sullivan. I need to prove that I can. Yates studied her with those steady gray eyes, and Tessa felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with embarrassment. There was something in the way he looked at her that made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced before. I understand, he said finally, but for what it is worth, I think anyone with eyes can see you are more than capable. The proof is all around us. He rode off before Tessa could formulate a response, leaving her standing in the Nevada dust with her heart beating faster than it should. The barn was nearly complete when disaster struck. Tessa was working on the roof, laying shingles across the frame she had spent weeks constructing, when one of the support beams shifted. She barely had time to register the cracking sound before the entire section gave way beneath her. She fell 12 feet, landing hard on the packed dirt floor of the barn. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs and sent a sharp spike of pain through her left ankle. For a moment, she just lay there, gasping for air and trying to assess the damage. Above her, the partially completed roof had a gaping hole where the section had collapsed. Tessa tried to stand and immediately collapsed again as her ankle gave out. White-hot pain shot up her leg, and she bit down hard on her lip to keep from crying out. Slowly, carefully, she pulled herself to a sitting position and examined her ankle. It was already beginning to swell, and when she tried to rotate it, the pain made her vision blur. Not broken, she told herself firmly. Just sprained. She had sprained this same ankle once before when she was 15 and had fallen off a green horse. This felt similar, the same deep ache and throbbing. But a sprain would still take weeks to heal properly, weeks she could not afford to lose. Using a piece of the fallen framing as a makeshift crutch, Tessa managed to hobble back to the tack room. She wrapped the ankle tightly with strips torn from an old shirt and elevated it on her cot, cursing her carelessness. She should have checked that beam more carefully before putting her full weight on it. She should have been more cautious. The next morning, her ankle was purple and swollen to twice its normal size. Tessa gritted her teeth and tried to work anyway, but within an hour she had to admit defeat. She could barely put weight on the foot, let alone climb ladders or haul lumber. For the first time since the fire, she felt tears of frustration burning behind her eyes. She was sitting on an overturned crate, her injured ankle propped up, when Yates Sullivan rode into the yard. He took one look at her and was off his horse in an instant. What happened? He crouched beside her, his face creased with concern. I fell while working on the barn roof yesterday. It is just a sprain. Tessa tried to keep her voice level, professional. I will be fine in a few days. Yates gently lifted her pant leg to examine the ankle and his jaw tightened. Miss Crawford, this needs proper medical attention. Let me take you to the doctor in town. I cannot afford to waste time seeing a doctor for a sprain. Tessa pulled her leg back, wincing at the movement. I just need to rest it for a day or two. You need to rest it for a lot longer than that, and you know it. Yates stood and crossed his arms, looking down at her with an expression that was part frustration, part admiration. Tessa, please, you have proven your point. You have rebuilt more in a month than most people could do in 3. Nobody is going to think less of you for taking a few days to heal from an injury. It was the first time he had used her given name, and something about hearing it in his voice made her defenses crack slightly. She looked up at him, this cowboy who kept showing up with offers of help, who looked at her like she was something remarkable instead of something to be managed or controlled. I cannot stop, she said quietly. If I stop, even for a few days, I might not find the strength to start again. And the Garrett Mining Company is still out there, still waiting for me to fail. Yates was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "What if I worked on the barn while you rest your ankle? Just for a few days until you can walk again. You can supervise, tell me exactly what to do. You would still be in charge of the project, still be making all the decisions. I would just be the labor." Tessa wanted to refuse. Everything in her wanted to maintain her independence, to prove she needed no one. But her ankle was throbbing, and she could see the collapsed section of roof from where she sat, and the practical part of her brain was screaming that she had no choice. 3 days, she said finally. You can work for 3 days while my ankle heals enough for me to get back to it. But I supervise every step, and you do exactly what I tell you. Yates smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and more open. Yes, madam. When do we start? They started immediately. Tessa hobbled over to the barn on her makeshift crutch and directed Yates as he assessed the damage from the collapse. He worked with an efficiency that impressed her, moving with the kind of practiced skill that came from years of hard physical labor. He did not try to take over or suggest different approaches. He simply listened to her instructions and executed them precisely. By the end of the first day, they had removed all the damaged framing and prepared the area for rebuilding. Tessa was exhausted from hobbling around supervising, but she also felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Yates had been true to his word, acting as her hands while respecting her authority over the project. As the sun set, Yates built up the fire in front of the tack room and produced a bundle from his saddlebag. I brought dinner, he said, unwrapping 2 thick sandwiches and a canteen of coffee. Figured you probably have not been eating much beyond beans and jerky. They ate together in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge above the Nevada desert. Tessa found herself studying Yates's profile in the firelight, noticing details she had not allowed herself to see before. The strong line of his jaw, the calluses on his hands that matched her own, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly. "Helping me, I mean. You do not know me. This is not your problem." Yates took a sip of coffee before answering. "My mother ran a ranch by herself after my father died when I was 10, he said. "Back in Wyoming. Everyone said she should sell, that a woman could not manage a cattle operation alone. She proved them all wrong, kept that place running until I was old enough to take over the heavy work." He looked at Tessa, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. "I saw how hard she fought for respect, for the simple right to keep what was hers. When I heard what happened to your place, I saw the same fight in you. I guess I wanted to help in a way I never got to help my mother." Something warm unfurled in Tessa's chest, a feeling she had been trying to ignore for weeks now. "What happened to your mother's ranch? Still in the family?" "My younger brother runs it now. I send money when I can, but I have always been more comfortable on the trail than in one place." He smiled slightly. Though I have to admit, Carlin is growing on me." Their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them felt charged with possibility. Then Tessa looked away, suddenly flustered. "You should get back to town before it gets too late. Mrs. Henderson will worry." Yates stood and gathered his things. "I will be back at first light. Try to rest that ankle, Tessa. Doctor's orders." "You are not a doctor," she pointed out, but she was smiling. "No, but I have sprained my share of body parts. Trust me on this one." After he left, Tessa sat by the fire for a long time, staring into the flames and thinking about Wyoming ranches and gray eyes, and the strange ache in her heart that had nothing to do with physical injury. The 3 days stretched into a week. Tessa's ankle healed slowly, and she found reasons to keep Yates working even after she could walk without limping. He repaired the roof section that had collapsed, reinforcing it with better supports. He helped her raise the barn walls and hang the doors. He worked from dawn until dusk, never complaining, never trying to take control of the project. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side during the days and sharing meals by the fire at night. Tessa found herself talking to Yates in a way she had never talked to anyone before, sharing her dreams for the ranch, her fears about the Garrett Mining Company, her memories of her father. In turn, Yates told her stories from the cattle trails, tales of stampedes and river crossings and nights spent under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. She learned that he was 26, that his favorite color was the deep blue of a twilight sky, that he had a scar on his left shoulder from a longhorn's horn, that he hummed while he worked when he thought no one was listening. She learned that he had never stayed in one place for more than a few months since leaving his family's ranch at 18, always moving with the cattle drives, always searching for something he could not quite name. "You ever get lonely?" Tessa asked one night as they sat by the fire. The barn was nearly complete, a sturdy structure that would house her horses and equipment when she could afford to replace them. Yates considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "The trail is good company, and most of the crews I work with are decent men. But there are nights when I wonder what it would be like to have a place of my own, someone to come home to." He looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "What about you? Do you get lonely out here?" "All the time," Tessa said honestly. "But loneliness is better than losing myself. I have seen too many women give up everything they are to fit into what some man thinks they should be. I would rather be lonely than lose who I am." "What if you did not have to choose?" Yates asked softly. "What if you could find someone who loved you for exactly who you are, independence and stubbornness and all?" Tessa's heart was beating so hard she was certain he could hear it. "That sounds like a fairy tale, not real life." "Maybe." Yates reached across the space between them and took her hand. His palm was warm and rough against hers, and the touch sent electricity racing up her arm. "Or maybe it is just a matter of finding the right person." They sat like that for a long moment, hands linked, the fire crackling between them. Then Tessa gently pulled away, standing up on legs that felt unsteady. "It is getting late. We should both get some rest." She could see disappointment flicker across Yates's face, but he nodded and stood as well. "Tessa, I want you to know something. Whatever happens between us, or does not happen, I will always respect your choices. If you tell me to leave and never come back, I will do it. Your independence is not something I want to take from you. It is one of the things I admire most about you." Tessa felt tears prick at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." That night, lying on her cot in the tack room, Tessa admitted something to herself she had been avoiding for weeks. She was falling in love with Yates Sullivan. She was falling in love with his quiet strength, his respect for her capabilities, The way he looked at her like she was the most fascinating thing in the world. And it terrified her. Love made you vulnerable. Love gave someone else the power to hurt you, to control you, to take away everything you had fought to build. Her mother had loved her father and had given up her own dreams to support his. Tessa had always sworn she would never do the same, but Yates did not feel like that kind of danger. He felt like the kind of person who would fight beside her rather than for her, who would catch her if she fell but let her do the climbing herself. Still, fear kept her from reaching for what she wanted. Fear and the stubborn pride that had kept her going through the worst weeks of her life. The barn was finished on a cold December morning, just over a month since the fire. Tessa stood back and surveyed their work, feeling a surge of pride so strong it nearly brought her to her knees. The structure was solid and well built, better in some ways than the barn that had burned. She had done this, with Yates's help, yes, but following her plans, her vision, her determination. "It looks good," Yates said, coming to stand beside her. "Your father would be proud." "I hope so." Tessa brushed a hand over her eyes, surprised to find them wet. "Thank you, Yates. I could not have done this without your help." "Yes, you could have," he said firmly. "It would have taken longer, but you would have done it. I just sped up the process a little." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the morning sun paint the barn's new wood in shades of gold and amber. Then Yates said, "I have to leave tomorrow. There is a cattle drive heading up to Wyoming, and they need experienced hands. The pay is good, and my brother could use the money I can send home." Tessa felt her stomach drop, but she kept her voice steady. "Of course, you have your own life, your own responsibilities. I am grateful you stayed as long as you did." "Tessa." Yates turned to face her, and there was an intensity in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Come with me." She stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Come with me? Not on the cattle drive, I know that is not what you want, but come to Wyoming. My brother is getting married next spring, and I would like you to meet my family, see where I come from." He took her hands in his, holding them gently but firmly. "I know this is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks. But Tessa, I have never felt this way about anyone before. You are the strongest, most remarkable person I have ever met, and I want to see where this goes between us. If you want that too." Tessa wanted to say yes more than she had wanted anything in her life. But the ranch spread out around them, the barn they had just built, the house foundation waiting to be rebuilt, all of it held her in place like an anchor. "I cannot leave. The Garrett Mining Company is still out there, still trying to force me off my land. If I leave, even for a few weeks, they might take that as their chance to move in. I have to stay and protect what is mine." Yates's face fell, but he nodded slowly. "I understand. Your land, your father's legacy, it is important. I would not ask you to give that up." "Then what are you asking?" Tessa heard the desperation in her own voice. "Because it feels like you are asking me to choose between you and everything I have built here." "No." Yates squeezed her hands. "I am asking if there is a way we can have both. If there is a world where I can be part of your life without asking you to give up your independence." "I do not know," Tessa said honestly. "I do not know how to do that. I do not know how to let someone in without losing myself." "Then maybe we figure it out together." Yates pulled her closer, and Tessa did not resist. "I will go on this cattle drive because I gave my word and my brother needs the money. But I will come back, Tessa. If you want me to, I will come back. And we can take this as slow as you need, figure out what works for both of us." Tessa looked up at him, this man who had shown up offering help and had somehow become essential to her in a matter of weeks. What if it does not work? What if we are too different, want different things? Then we will deal with that when it happens. But what if it does work? Yates smiled, that transformative smile that made her heart skip. "What if we are exactly what each other needs?" Tessa made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. She stood on her toes and kissed him, a brief, gentle press of lips that somehow said everything she could not put into words. When she pulled back, Yates was looking at her like she had hung the moon. "Come back to me," she whispered. "Please come back." "I promise," he said, and kissed her again, deeper this time, with a tenderness that made her believe in possibilities she had long since given up on. Yates left the next morning just as the sun was rising. Tessa watched him ride away, her heart feeling too big for her chest. Then she turned back to her ranch, to the barn standing proud and the house foundation waiting for her attention, and she got to work. The winter months were hard and lonely. Tessa threw herself into rebuilding the house, working from dawn to dusk despite the cold. She framed walls and laid floors, installed windows she bought with the last of her savings, built a fireplace from river stone she hauled herself. The work was grueling and often frustrating, but it gave her something to focus on besides the ache of missing Yates. He wrote her letters that arrived with the weekly mail delivery to Carlin. Long letters full of details about the cattle drive, about the landscape they were crossing, about how much he missed her. Tessa read each one multiple times, memorizing the shape of his handwriting, the way he signed them yours. Yates, with a certainty that made her smile. She wrote back, telling him about the progress on the house, about the small victories and setbacks of her days. She told him things she had never told anyone, about her fears and hopes and dreams for the future. Writing to Yates felt like opening a part of herself she had kept locked away for so long, and while it scared her, it also felt like breathing after holding her breath for years. The Garrett Mining Company made one more attempt to intimidate her in January. 3 men showed up claiming they had paperwork showing mineral rights to her land. Tessa met them at the property line with her rifle across her lap and a steely determination in her eyes. "This land is legally mine," she said coldly. "The deed is filed with the county, and there are no mineral rights claims on it. Whatever paperwork you think you have is fraudulent, and if you step 1 foot on my property, I will shoot first and ask questions later." The men tried to argue, tried to threaten, tried to cajole. Tessa sat on her horse, rifle ready, and stared them down until they left. But her hands shook for an hour after they were gone, and that night she lay awake wondering if she was fighting a battle she could not win. The house was nearly complete when Yates returned in early March. Tessa was on the roof, hammering down the last of the shingles, when she saw a familiar figure riding up the path. Her heart leaped into her throat, and she nearly fell off the roof in her haste to climb down. Yates dismounted before his horse had fully stopped and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed and cried at the same time. "You came back," she said against his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of leather and sage. "I told you I would." Yates set her down but kept his arms around her, like he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. "Tessa, God, I missed you. Every day, every mile, all I could think about was getting back to you." They kissed there in the yard, surrounded by the evidence of Tessa's months of hard work, and it felt like coming home in a way neither of them had experienced before. When they finally pulled apart, Yates looked around at the nearly completed house, his eyes wide. "You did all this yourself?" His voice was full of awe. "I had a lot of time to work after a certain cowboy rode off into the sunset." Tessa smiled, threading her fingers through his. "Come on, let me show you inside." The house was simple but sturdy, with 2 bedrooms, a main living area with the stone fireplace, and a kitchen that still needed some finishing touches. Tessa had built furniture from salvaged wood, sewn curtains from fabric she bought in town, created a home from nothing but determination and skill. "It is incredible," Yates said, running his hand along the smooth wood of the mantelpiece. "Tessa, this is real craftsmanship. Your father would be so proud of what you have accomplished." "I hope so." Tessa leaned against him, allowing herself to relax for the first time in months. "I still need to replace the livestock and some of the equipment, but the structures are all rebuilt. The ranch is whole again." They stood together in the house Tessa had built with her own 2 hands, and Yates pulled her closer. "I have been thinking about something the whole drive north and back again," he said. "I want to stay, Tessa. I want to be here with you, help you run this ranch, if you will have me." Tessa's breath caught. "What about your family in Wyoming? What about the cattle drives? My brother is married now and his wife's family has money. They do not need my help anymore. And I am tired of the trail, tired of wandering. I want to build something permanent, something that lasts." He cupped her face in his hands, his gray eyes serious. "But only if that is what you want too. I will not stay if it means taking away your independence or making you feel like this is not your ranch anymore. We can figure out how to make this work together as partners, or I can leave, and we can keep writing letters for the rest of our lives. Whatever you need, Tessa." Tessa felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears, tears of relief and joy and a hope she had not dared to feel before. "I want you to stay," she said. "I want to build a life with you, but I need you to understand that this is my ranch, my responsibility. I cannot hand that over to someone else, even someone I love." Yates smiled, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "I would not want you to. How about this? We run the ranch together, but the deed stays in your name. You make the final decisions about the land and the business. I am just the hired hand who happens to be in love with the boss." Tessa laughed through her tears. "That is the worst business arrangement I have ever heard, probably, but I do not care about business arrangements, I care about you." Yates kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Marry me, Tessa Crawford. Not because you need me, but because you want me. Not to give up your independence, but to share your life. Marry me and let me spend the rest of my days proving that love does not have to mean losing yourself." Tessa kissed him with all the emotion she had been holding back for months, pouring everything she felt into that connection. When they finally broke apart, she was breathless and grinning. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Yates Sullivan, on one condition. Anything. We get married right here on this ranch. Not in a church in town where everyone can whisper about the wild woman who thinks she can run a ranch alone. Right here, on the land I fought to keep." "I would not have it any other way," Yates said, and kissed her again. They were married 6 weeks later on a sunny April morning with the newly rebuilt ranch as their witness. The minister from Carlin performed the ceremony in front of the house, and a small group of people who had come to respect Tessa's determination attended. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house cried happy tears. The owner of the general store gave them a set of dishes as a wedding present. Even the marshal showed up, looking slightly uncomfortable in his best suit. Tessa wore a simple dress she had sewn herself from cream-colored fabric, and Yates wore his cleanest work clothes with a new shirt he had bought special for the occasion. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising partnership and respect and love that would weather any storm. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed Tessa to the sound of applause and the whistles of a few rowdy ranch hands who had ridden in from neighboring spreads. Then everyone moved inside the house for a simple reception of food and drink and celebration. As the sun set and their guests began to leave, Tessa and Yates stood on the porch of their house, watching the Nevada landscape turn gold and purple in the fading light. Yates wrapped his arm around Tessa's waist, and she leaned into him, feeling a contentment she had never thought possible. "No regrets?" Yates asked softly. "Not a single one." Tessa looked up at him, this man who had respected her enough to let her fight her own battles, who had loved her enough to come back. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" "I rebuilt this ranch myself. I proved I could do it alone. So now when I choose to share it with you, nobody can say it is because I needed you." She smiled. "I am choosing you, Yates, not because I have to, but because I want to, because you make my life better, not smaller." Yates pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "You make my life better too. You make me want to be the kind of man who deserves you." "You already are," Tessa said, and meant it with her whole heart. That night, in the house she had built with her own hands, Tessa and Yates began their life together. Not as owner and helper, not as dependent and provider, but as true partners in every sense of the word. The seasons turned, and the ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Yates proved to be an excellent cattleman, slowly building up their herd with careful purchases and smart breeding. Tessa managed the finances and the business side, negotiating deals with buyers and keeping meticulous records. They worked together seamlessly, each respecting the other's strengths and supporting their weaknesses. The Garrett Mining Company tried one more time to pressure them off the land. This time, Yates and Tessa met the representatives together, a united front that made it clear they would not be intimidated or bought out. When the company men left empty-handed, Yates and Tessa celebrated with a bottle of whiskey and a long conversation about their plans for expanding the ranch operations. In December of their first year of marriage, nearly 2 years after the fire that had destroyed everything, Tessa discovered she was pregnant. She told Yates one evening as they sat by the fireplace in their warm, solid house, and the look of pure joy on his face made her fall in love with him all over again. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Tessa, we are going to be parents." "Are you ready for that?" Tessa asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "With you, I am ready for anything." Yates kissed her softly. "This child is going to have the strongest, most incredible mother in the world. And I am going to do everything I can to be worthy of being their father." Their son was born in late summer of 1883, a healthy baby with Tessa's auburn hair and Yates's gray eyes. They named him Thomas, after Tessa's father, and from the moment they laid eyes on him, their hearts expanded in ways they had not known were possible. Tessa had worried about how motherhood would change her relationship with the ranch, whether she would feel torn between her child and the land she had fought so hard to keep. But Yates made sure she never had to choose. He took on extra responsibilities so she could spend time with Thomas in those early months. He built a cradle that could be carried out to the field so the baby could be with them while they worked. He supported her decision to keep running the business side of the ranch, even with an infant to care for. "You are not just a mother," he told her one night as they watched Thomas sleep in his cradle. "You are a rancher, a businesswoman, my wife, and a mother. You can be all of those things at once, Tessa. You do not have to give up pieces of yourself." Those words meant more to Tessa than Yates could possibly know. She had spent so much of her life afraid that love would require sacrifice, that she would have to choose between her identity and her heart. But Yates proved every day that the right person would celebrate all the parts of her, not ask her to diminish any of them. As Thomas grew from baby to toddler, he became a fixture of the ranch, toddling after his parents as they worked, learning to love the land the way they did. Yates taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, sitting him on the gentlest horse and walking alongside with a protective hand. Tessa taught him numbers and letters using ranch records and feed sacks, turning everyday life into lessons. 2 years after Thomas was born, Tessa gave birth to twin daughters, Emily and Sarah, who arrived squalling and healthy into the world. The house that Tessa had built suddenly felt full in the best possible way, alive with the sound of children's laughter and the chaos of family life. Yates proved to be a devoted father, patient and loving with all three children. He changed diapers and told bedtime stories and played endless games of pretend. He never complained about the work or the noise or the way their quiet evenings together had been replaced by the beautiful mayhem of parenthood. The ranch continued to grow and thrive. By 1888, they had a substantial herd of cattle, a barn full of good horses, and a reputation for fair dealing that brought buyers from as far as California. Tessa had proved beyond any doubt that a woman could run a successful ranch operation, and the people of Carlin had come to respect her not in spite of her gender but simply for her competence and integrity. On a warm evening in June, Tessa and Yates sat on the porch they had built together, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas, now 6, was showing his 4-year-old sisters how to stack rocks into towers. The sound of their laughter drifted across the land, mixing with the evening birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle. "You remember the first time you came here?" Tessa asked, leaning against Yates's shoulder. "When you offered to help rebuild?" "I remember you telling me you could manage on your own." Yates smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You were covered in soot and had the most determined look in your eyes I had ever seen. I think I started falling in love with you right then." "Really?" "Even when I was being stubborn and refusing help, especially then." Yates wrapped his arm around her. "You were the strongest person I had ever met. You still are." Tessa looked out over the ranch, taking in the solid buildings, the healthy livestock, the thriving land. All of it had risen from ash and determination. All of it was proof that she could do hard things, that she could overcome obstacles that would have broken lesser people. But the greatest accomplishment, she thought, was not the ranch itself. It was the fact that she had built this life without giving up who she was. She was still Tessa Crawford Sullivan, rancher and businesswoman, mother and wife, strong and independent and loved. She had not had to choose between her identity and her happiness. She had found a way to have both. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, noticing her faraway expression. "Just how lucky I am," Tessa said honestly. "The fire was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it brought you into my life. If the ranch had not burned down, you would have just ridden past that day. We might never have really talked, never have gotten to know each other. I like to think we would have found each other somehow," Yates said. "Some things are just meant to be. Maybe." Tessa watched as Thomas helped Emily build her rock tower, patient and gentle despite being so young himself. "He is going to be a good man like his father. And the girls are going to be strong and capable like their mother." Yates grinned. "God help any man who tries to tell them what they can and cannot do." Tessa laughed, imagining her daughters as grown women, fierce and independent and unafraid. She would raise them to know their own worth, to fight for what was theirs, to never settle for less than they deserved. But she would also teach them that strength and love were not mutually exclusive, that the right partner would support their dreams rather than limit them. As the sun set over the Nevada ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, Tessa felt a profound sense of peace. She had rebuilt her life from ashes, had proved her worth to herself and the world. She had found love without losing herself, had built a family without giving up her independence. The ranch that had once been a pile of charred ruins now stood strong and prosperous, a testament to determination and hard work and the refusal to give up. The walls Tessa had rebuilt with her own hands sheltered a family full of love and laughter. The land that had been threatened and attacked now flourished under the care of two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Years passed in a blur of work and family, of challenges overcome and victories celebrated. Thomas grew into a teenager with his mother's determination and his father's easy way with animals. The twins developed distinct personalities, Emily quiet and thoughtful, Sarah bold and adventurous, but both fiercely intelligent and capable. In 1895, when Thomas was 12 and the twins were 10, the Garrett Mining Company finally abandoned their attempts to claim the Crawford Ranch. They had found richer deposits elsewhere, and the stubbornness of the ranch's owners had made it clear that forcing them out would cost more than any potential profit was worth. Tessa heard the news from the marshal and felt a weight she had carried for years finally lift from her shoulders. "It is really over," she told Yates that night, still hardly believing it. "They are giving up. You outlasted them." Yates pulled her into his arms. "You protected what was yours and proved that your will was stronger than their greed. I am so proud of you, Tessa." But Tessa knew it was not just her victory. It was theirs, a result of years of partnership and mutual support. Yates had been beside her through every challenge, every setback, every small triumph. He had respected her authority while offering his strength. He had loved her without trying to control her. The ranch continued to prosper into the new century. As their children grew older, they each found their own relationship with the land. Thomas announced at 16 that he wanted to follow in his parents' footsteps and run the ranch someday. Emily discovered a talent for breeding horses and began developing a program that would eventually become renowned across the territory. Sarah decided she wanted to become a veterinarian, one of the first female veterinarians in Nevada, and began studying with the local animal doctor. Tessa and Yates supported each of their children's choices, encouraging them to pursue their passions while instilling in them the values of hard work and integrity. They taught their children that strength came in many forms, that success was not about conforming to expectations, but about being true to yourself. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, Yates surprised Tessa with a gift. He led her out to the barn, where a new sign hung over the door. Crawford Sullivan Ranch, it read with a smaller line beneath. Established 1881. 1881, Tessa questioned, running her fingers over the carved letters. The ranch was established before that. The Crawford Ranch was, Yates agreed. But this ranch, our ranch, the one we built together from ash and determination, this started in 1881. The year you rebuilt it, the year we found each other. Tessa felt tears welling in her eyes. After 20 years of marriage, Yates could still surprise her, still find ways to show her how much he understood and valued what she had accomplished. "It is perfect," she whispered, standing on her toes to kiss him. "You are perfect." "Not perfect," Yates corrected gently. "Just perfect for you." As they stood together in the barn, Tessa had rebuilt with her own hands, surrounded by the evidence of everything they had built together. Tessa reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She thought about the frightened, determined woman who had stood among smoking ruins and vowed to rebuild alone. She thought about the stubborn refusal to accept help, born from fear of losing herself. She thought about learning that love did not have to mean surrender, that partnership could mean strength rather than weakness. The ranch that had burned to ash had been resurrected into something even better than before. Not just the physical structures, but the life built within them. A life full of love and laughter, hard work and satisfaction, challenges overcome and dreams realized. Tessa had rebuilt every wall before Yates could offer help, and in doing so, had proved something essential to herself and the world. But the real triumph was not in the rebuilding itself. It was in what came after, when she chose to let Yates be part of her life, not out of need but out of love. When she discovered that opening her heart did not mean closing off her strength. When she learned that the greatest courage was not in standing alone, but in choosing to stand together. As the years continued to pass, Tessa and Yates grew old together on the ranch they loved. Their hair turned gray, their hands became more gnarled, their steps slower, but their love only deepened. They watched their children grow into capable adults who carried forward the values they had been taught. Thomas took over the day-to-day operations of the ranch with his wife Mary, a schoolteacher from town who proved to be just as stubborn and capable as his mother. Emily's horse breeding program became famous throughout Nevada and beyond, her gentle way with animals producing some of the finest stock in the region. Sarah became the veterinarian she dreamed of being, opening a practice in Carlin and caring for animals across 3 counties. Grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with new energy and new generations to carry forward the legacy. Tessa loved watching Yates with the grandchildren, seeing the same patience and gentleness he had shown their own children. She loved the way he would hoist them onto horses and walk them around the corral, just as he had done with Thomas decades earlier. She loved the stories he told them about the old cattle drives, about meeting their grandmother, about the history of the ranch they would inherit. In the quiet moments, usually in the evenings after the grandchildren had been put to bed and the ranch work was done, Tessa and Yates would sit on their porch and watch the sun set over the Nevada landscape they knew so well. Sometimes they talked, sharing memories and making plans. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from decades of deep companionship. "You ever regret it?" Tessa asked one evening when she was in her early 60s. "Not having a bigger ranch, not pushing to expand more. We could have bought neighboring land, built an empire." Yates looked at her with surprise and then with understanding. "Tessa, I have everything I ever wanted right here. A woman I love beyond measure, children and grandchildren who are thriving, a ranch that provides for our family and gives us meaningful work. Why would I want more than that?" "I just want to make sure you are happy," Tessa said. "That you do not feel like marrying me held you back from something bigger." Yates took her hand, the same gesture he had made 1,000 times over their years together. "Marrying you was the biggest thing I ever did. Building this life with you has been the greatest adventure I could have imagined. I have no regrets, Tessa, not a single one." Tessa squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that remained even as age crept in. "I love you, Yates Sullivan. I have loved you since the day you came back from that cattle drive in Wyoming, maybe even before that, though I was too stubborn to admit it." "I love you too," Yates said simply. "Every stubborn, strong, incredible part of you." They sat together as the stars emerged, the same stars that had watched over them for decades. The ranch around them was quiet except for the normal sounds of evening, horses settling in the barn, the distant call of a coyote, the rustle of wind through the sage. Tessa thought about the fire that had consumed her father's ranch all those years ago, the disaster that had felt like the end of everything. She thought about standing in the ruins, making the choice to rebuild alone, to prove her strength and independence. She thought about Yates riding into her life with offers of help she repeatedly refused. And she thought about the journey from that point to this one, from burning ash to enduring love. The ranch that rose from those ashes had become more than just buildings and land. It had become a symbol of resilience, a testament to the power of determination combined with love, of strength enhanced rather than diminished by partnership. The walls Tessa had rebuilt with her own hands had sheltered generations of love and growth. The foundation she had laid in stubborn independence had supported a family built on mutual respect and deep affection. As Tessa and Yates grew into their 70s, they began to step back from the daily operations of the ranch, trusting Thomas and Mary to manage things while they enjoyed a well-earned rest. But they never fully retired, never stopped caring for the land that had been the center of their lives for so long. Yates still checked on the horses every morning. Tessa still reviewed the financial records every week. The ranch was in their blood, as much a part of them as their own heartbeats. On a summer day in 1918, Tessa and Yates celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary surrounded by 3 generations of family. The ranch house, which had once been a pile of ash, rang with laughter and music. Their children, now middle-aged with families of their own, had organized the celebration. Grandchildren ran through the rooms Tessa had built, and great-grandchildren toddled after them, filling the space with joy. Thomas stood up to make a toast, raising his glass to his parents. "To my mother and father," he said, his voice carrying over the gathered family. "My mother taught me that strength means never giving up, even when everything seems lost. My father taught me that true strength also means knowing when to accept help and how to be a partner rather than just a provider." Together, they built something that has lasted decades and will continue for generations to come. To Tessa and Yates Sullivan, the finest people I have ever known. The family echoed the toast, and Tessa felt tears streaming down her face. These were the happy tears of a life well lived, of love freely given and received, of a legacy that would outlive her physical presence on this earth. Yates wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close in the gesture that had become second nature over their decades together. "We did good, Tessa," he whispered in her ear. "Look at what we built." Tessa looked around the room at faces that carried echoes of her own and Yates's features, at the family that had grown from the choice they made to build a life together. She looked through the windows at the ranch that had been her father's, then hers alone, then theirs together, and now belonged to the next generation while still carrying the values and love that had rebuilt it from ash. "We did better than good," she whispered back. "We did something extraordinary." As the party continued around them, Tessa and Yates slipped outside to the porch where they had spent countless evenings over the years. The Nevada landscape spread before them, unchanged in its essential beauty despite the decades that had passed. The barn stood solid and strong. The house they had built together showed the wear of years and family, but remained sturdy. Fences marked boundaries of land that had been fought for and protected. Everything spoke of permanence, of roots sunk deep into the earth. "You remember the day we met?" Yates asked, gazing out over the ranch. "You were so determined to do everything yourself, so fierce and independent." "I remember you offering to help and me turning you down," Tessa said with a smile. "I remember being so sure that accepting help would mean losing something essential about myself." "What changed your mind?" Tessa considered the question. "I do not think my mind changed exactly. I still believe I needed to prove I could rebuild on my own, that I was capable of doing hard things without relying on anyone else. But somewhere along the way, I realized that choosing to accept help after proving my capability was different from needing help because I could not manage alone. You let me make that distinction. You respected my need to be strong while also being there when I was ready to let you in. You made it easy to respect you," Yates said. "You still do, every single day." They stood together in the gathering twilight, 2 people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, even when they had not known they were searching for it. The ranch around them represented not just physical structures and land, but the building of a life based on mutual respect, deep love, and the understanding that true partnership enhanced rather than diminished individual strength. As the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear overhead, Tessa leaned against Yates and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the fire that had destroyed everything and forced her to discover just how strong she was. Gratitude for her stubborn insistence on rebuilding alone, which had proved something essential to herself and the world. And gratitude for Yates, who had loved her enough to wait, to respect her independence, to support her strength rather than try to replace it with his own. The years continued to pass with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Seasons turned, bringing the work of planting and harvest, of breeding and birthing, of mending and building. Tessa and Yates moved into their 80s still together, still in love, still finding joy in the simple pleasures of shared mornings and quiet evenings. When Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep at 84, Tessa grieved deeply but not destructively. She had known from the beginning that their time together was finite, that one of them would eventually have to face life without the other. She mourned the loss of her partner, her best friend, the man who had shown her that love did not require surrender. But she also celebrated the decades they had shared, the life they had built, the love that had sustained them both. Tessa lived for another 5 years after Yates's death, spending those years surrounded by family, watching new great-great-grandchildren arrive, seeing the ranch continue to thrive under the capable management of the generations that followed. She told stories to anyone who would listen about the old days, about rebuilding from ash, about a cowboy who had offered help, and then respected her refusal, about learning that independence and love could coexist. On a warm June evening just after her 89th birthday, Tessa sat on the porch of the house she had built with her own hands. Her body was frail now, weakened by age and the cumulative effect of decades of hard work. But her mind was clear and her heart was full. She looked out over the ranch that had been the center of her world for so long. The barn she had rebuilt stood strong, housing horses descended from the ones she and Yates had raised. The house sheltered multiple generations of family, all living and working together in the partnership and respect she had modeled. The land stretched out in all directions, protected and cherished by people who understood its value. Tessa closed her eyes and felt the Nevada breeze on her face, warm and familiar. She thought about her father, who had first taught her to love this land. She thought about the fire that had taken everything and the choice she had made to rebuild rather than surrender. She thought about Yates, about gray eyes and patient hands and a love that had honored, who she was rather than trying to change her. She thought about her children and grandchildren and all the generations that would follow, carrying forward the legacy of strength and partnership. As the sun set on her last day, Tessa felt no fear, only peace. She had lived a full life, had fought for what mattered, had loved deeply and been deeply loved in return. She had proved that women could be strong and capable, that independence and partnership were not mutually exclusive, that love did not require the diminishment of self. The ranch that had burned to ash and been rebuilt through determination and skill would continue long after she was gone. The walls she had raised with her own hands would shelter generations to come. The love she had shared with Yates would echo through the decades in the values they had taught and the example they had set. Tessa Crawford Sullivan passed away peacefully that evening, surrounded by family who loved her, on the land she had fought to protect. Her last conscious thought was of Yates, waiting for her somewhere beyond this life, ready to begin their next adventure together. The Crawford Sullivan Ranch continues to this day, still operated by descendants of Tessa and Yates, still embodying the principles they established over a century ago. The barn and house have been maintained and updated over the years, but the foundation remains the same, built by a woman who refused to surrender, who proved her strength by rebuilding from nothing, and who discovered that true love enhances rather than diminishes the people who share it. In Carlin, Nevada, there is a historical marker now that tells the story of Tessa Crawford Sullivan, one of the first women to successfully operate a large ranch independently in Nevada. The marker mentions the fire that destroyed her property and her determination to rebuild alone. It talks about her business acumen, her skill as a rancher, and her role in proving that women were just as capable as men in managing agricultural operations. But for those who knew the full story, who heard it passed down through generations of the Sullivan family, the real tale is not just about independence and capability. It is about a woman who was strong enough to stand alone and brave enough to choose partnership. About a man who respected strength enough to wait for invitation rather than assumption. About love built on mutual respect, enhanced by shared values, and sustained by the understanding that true partnership means supporting each other's growth rather than limiting it. The walls Tessa built before Yates could offer help still stand, metaphorically and literally, as a testament to the power of determination and the importance of proving capability before choosing interdependence. Those walls became the foundation for a love story that spanned decades and continues to influence generations. And if you listen carefully on quiet Nevada evenings when the wind blows through the sage, some say you can still hear the echo of hammers and saws, the sound of a woman rebuilding her world with her own two hands, creating something that would last far beyond her lifetime. Not just buildings and fences, but a legacy of strength, independence, love, and the understanding that sometimes the greatest courage is not in standing alone, but in choosing to stand together while remaining wholly yourself.